Welcome back to the CyberRisk TV live stream for Octane 2024 at Caesars Forum in Las Vegas. I'm your host, Mandy Logan, and today I am joined by Punit Minocha, who is the Executive Vice President, Business Development and Corporate Strategy at Zscaler. And today we are talking about an integrated approach to securing today's hybrid workforce. Punit, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Mandy.
Oh, I'm very happy that you are here. I have limited exposure to Zscaler as a practitioner, but I have thoroughly enjoyed the information that I have attained from Zscaler and the individuals that I have interacted with at Zscaler. And please, to start, what is Zscaler?
Yeah, so perhaps I can step back and talk a little about this. We've been in business for the past 15 years. And security tends to be extremely fragmented. Zscaler is all about making sure that the right users, when they're going out to the internet or whichever destination they might have, whether it's the traditional internet like ESPN or your private internet or intranet, that we act as that switchboard to make sure that the right user goes out to the right destination. Nothing good leaves the organization in terms of sensitive data, and nothing bad comes in. So think of us as a switchboard. The best analogy I might give, imagine if there's a bad guy that is trying to go rob a bank. The first thing he or she might do is scour, where are all the branches, and then look for the one which perhaps has the least amount of security.
Security, correct.
Get into the bank and then start to look for where the safe might be. And then once you have the safe, you go steal the money, right? And if I contrast that to what Zscaler will do, right, we try and move away from traditional network gateways like a firewall, if you will, which broadcasts that this is where I am. Instead, we try and eliminate all of that. In technical terms, we have something called an inside-out connection. We are wheeling out as opposed to allowing things to come back in. That in itself eliminates the attack surface, so you can't tell I'm even there. And so you can't find all those different branches, if you will. But even if you think you could find us, right, you try and prevent the compromise. And what I mean by that is you provide an additional level of security, looking at different technologies, advanced threats, content inspection, etc. And then you try and permeate that even further by trying to make sure that you can't traverse laterally. And what I mean by that is if you walked into the same bank, you can't move to the safe because you have privileges just to go to a particular security window, as an example. And then finally, making sure that nothing leaves, the cache doesn't leave, we have data protection capabilities. So it all centers around making sure that large enterprises, when they're trying to be productive, providing a solid foundation all around network traffic, network communication, network security.
So it sounds a little bit as though you are making an invisibility cloak for the customers, for the corporation, the data, and the employees in a way.
That's actually a very good analogy. I mean, the best way we actually describe ourselves in a lot of ways is, regardless of where the user is, we have points of presence all over the globe. Right. Because we want to be as close to the end users. And our points of presence act as those scrubbing centers, the invisible cloak that you just referenced. Again, the basic idea is the traffic is traversing through that cloak. It's not, all it's doing is looking at it in terms of making sure nothing bad leaves that cloak and nothing good leaves that cloak, if you will, and nothing bad comes in.
So with that, I'm curious, how and why is partnering with Okta part of the best practices for an organization?
Absolutely. Very good question and very appropriate given the conference that we are at. Yeah. To instrument that cloak, I need to have context. Mandy, you as a individual working at SC Media, need to have the privileges to go to a particular application. How do I have access to that information? That's where Okta comes in. We are a consumer of identity. We started working with Okta over 12, 15 years ago. They were a pioneer in something called single sign-on. It was a technology that at the time was in its infancy. And we were an early adopter of a standard called SAML. And together, it was a solid foundation upon which companies are built. To the point where I would say today, of the 9,000 odd customers that Zscaler has, I reckon over 50% are using an integration between Okta and Zscaler.
Are they really?
Yeah, indeed.
Oh, excellent. And I believe you also have strategic partnerships with CrowdStrike
We do.
as well.
We do.
Right. Go ahead.
Let me expand on that. So security can be extremely fragmented. I mean, today it's not uncommon to find probably about over 3,000, 5,000 different vendors trying to address a particular security need. If you go into a large financial organization, it's not surprising that they may have over 50, sometimes 100 different security solutions in play. And there is an element of fatigue that is set in for the administrators to have to manage all the disparate vendors.
Sure.
And there's a trend towards consolidation. Within consolidation, it makes a lot of sense to help simplify, reduce that complexity, create automation. But there's certain areas within security that just lend themselves to be so deep in what they do. In that construct, Zscaler is all about, our North Star is all around network security, if you will.
Okay.
Okta approaches things from an identity standpoint, and they are all things identity. CrowdStrike approaches things from an endpoint, if you will. What is physically resident on a laptop or a desktop or a mobile device, etc. And so we have our respective swim lanes. We have conviction that what we do is so good that end customers want that best of breed combination. And it is a testament to that belief. I would say across the board, we probably have over 2,500, 3,000 joint customers that use those three technologies, if you will. And we have now built enough information exchange between those three solutions that customers find that to be so valuable. It's become so sticky for them that that has really become the best standard going forward.
I'm very curious. In the last, especially say 4 years, what has been your take on the impact and increase of hybrid work environment on the accessibility of security teams to quickly and efficiently take in the adoption of multiple solutions?
Yep.
From Zscaler, Okta, CrowdStrike, please.
Right. I say the hybrid workforce is indeed a thing, and it behooves all security solutions out there to adapt to it. And so, when we think of hybrid, it could be a combination of there's a workforce where you have the users, they could be partner communities, they could be supply chain entities that are feeding you information. It could be a different form factor altogether. So it could be a headquarters, it could be a Starbucks cafe or a...
I was just thinking same, yes.
Right, exactly, right? I mean, or it could be IoT, which is
Correct.
becoming so pervasive. Across all the various form factors, it behooves us to all work together. And so what I mean by that is, in the case of Okta, it is important that we address our customers' needs. They have a solution now, not only for the workforce, but also for third-party B2B partners.
Okay.
And so we're incorporating signals to provide a solution that allows that. When you're dealing with third-party elements like your suppliers, it's one thing to say, SC Media has a solution, but if you're working with a partner of SC Media, they may or may not have an Okta or a Zscaler or a CrowdStrike. And so how do you make sure that you're following through and providing that consistent security? Those are the types of solutions that we are now working on to provide that rich telemetry so that we minimize the attack surface. It's all about trying to keep that as limited as possible, because there is no magic or silver bullet towards security. If there's a vendor that says, I can solve all of your security problems and you will never be compromised,
Right.
I think they're just not being truthful, right? And so,
No, we have constant jokes about any marketing that comes up of you are now unhackable.
yeah, listen, it's just not a thing, right? And
No.
so but at the same time, you need to stay ahead of what is occurring. And so having that belief and the confidence that you're trying to minimize the surface area, the bad actors are continuing to innovate on themselves, and AI is a thing.
Absolutely,
They're using
yes.
AI for that too now. And so it behooves us to continue to minimize the surface area, stay ahead of things, and adapt and use technologies, automation, simplicity, complexity to help our customers.
Well, on that, can you provide some real-world examples of how Zscaler and Okta
Yeah.
have firmed up, I guess,
Yeah.
the security of the hybrid work environment?
Absolutely. So let's take a simple example. There was a reason why I was asking, how long have you been at SC Media? You've been doing what you have at SC Media for 2.5 years. Presumably in the last 2.5 years, and I apologize if I'm being presumptive, you may have switched roles, right? So
Right.
maybe you were first following politics or, particular healthcare industry, and now you're on cyber. Um, As a result of that, you may or may not have had access to certain private information pieces of SC Media. And then you switch roles. Let's say now you're in cyber risk, right? You're doing cyber risk, you shouldn't have access to those previous pieces of information. But did those actually get revoked, right? And so
True.
that's an example of something that creates an exposure. It's very common in large enterprises where people switch roles or perhaps leave the companies. A few years ago, we worked with Okta, adopted a standard called SCIM, which is all about trying to, minimize that or simplify the provisioning, if you will. So the first thing that we had done, 12 plus years ago was all around authorization. That is the SAML, single sign-on, making sure that I have the credentials from the end user. Now, when the end user privileges themselves are moving, like you just did in my example, we need to make sure that we are dynamically adapting to that, right? So that, again, keep that risk area small. And so we adapted the SCIM integration to then make sure that we are keeping our policy engine up to date. And such that when you switch and Okta makes that change on their side, we immediately pick that up and implement it on our side. That was one of the things we did about 3 or 4 years ago. We have a lot of customers that use that. More recently, we started to realize Okta has, 10 plus thousand customers, probably a lot more, 20,000 or so. We have about 10,000 customers. We all see very rich pieces of information within our own domain. Wouldn't it be great if we were sharing that piece of information amongst each other, right? Because once you have more information, you can try and establish better context of what is going on. Context is very important. If I was yesterday in Africa,
And doesn't context immediately influence provisioning anyway?
it does to some extent. However, you have to signal each other. So,
Okay.
simple example, like you said, provisioning. Provisioning is all about making sure that, I'm taking the credentials as I need. But let's say, going back to my example where I was in Africa, not to generalize, but it could be viewed, you've been sitting in North America your entire, life, if you will, and now you're suddenly in Africa and you're accessing private information from Africa for the company. That feels strange. Could it be a hacker or is it genuinely Mandy in Africa? And so
Finally got to do a Safari.
there you go, right? It's wonderful, isn't it? I've done that too. But in an example like that, we might suggest to you, listen, that feels strange. We're going to ask you to really prove who you are. And so there's something in security worlds called step-up authentication, where not only am I asking you to put in your password, but then perhaps a second way of authenticating. It could be a phone, it could be a text message, whatever the case might be. That's an example where we're sharing information amongst each other, that I am now in Africa or vice versa. And Okta started to provide that information to us. We are now able to ingest it. We started sharing that information with Okta last year, and they've been great at digesting that and implementing policies on their side. We've started doing that now more recently, and that's the big announcement we made just this past week.
Oh my goodness, Puneet, this has been fascinating, and I can see a wealth of information for aiding security teams in really making sure the hybrid work environment becomes steadily viable, even with the advent of AI, with
Yeah.
all of the threat actors becoming more intense. So this has a lot of deep information. I'm definitely going to encourage our audience to look into more of what Zscaler does and what your integration with Okta allows.
Much appreciated, Mandy.
Thank you for being with us. And thank you to our audience for tuning in for this live interview from Octane 2024. To find all the Cyber Risk TV coverage of this year's event, visit securityweekly.com/Octane.